We're here this morning with Vera Wheeler. I talked to Vera about her life. Vera, will you state your full name for us?
Vera Holderfield Wheeler.
Okay. And your maiden name?
Holderfield.
What was your full name?
Vera Ellen Holderfield.
Vera Ellen.
Mm-hmm.
When were you born?
In August 28, 1914.
1914. Where were you born?
In Seminole, Oklahoma.
Okay. What are the full names of your mother and father?
My dad's name, we called him Papa. Of course, it was Louis Watch Holderfield. Mm-hmm. He always called L.W. And then Mom was Dana Tilly-I.E. Ricker. That was what we called her middle name, was Tilly-I.E. I don't know where that came from, but anyway, her name was Dana.
Of course, they're both deceased. Do you know where they were born?
Papa was born in Ash Flat, Arkansas, and I don't know when he was born exactly. I've got those dates at home. Mm-hmm. And Mom was born in Missouri, but now Papa's folks all came from Tennessee to Arkansas.
When did they die?
Let's see, Papa died in 1941, and then Mom passed away in
64.
In 64.
Are they buried together?
Both in Seminole.
Okay. Do you know anything about your grandparents?
The only thing I know about was Papa's father. And I looked up to some records, and back in 1910 census, that's before just right after statehood, that they were in Earlsboro, Oklahoma. It was my Papa's, his father, and his brother and his sister. They were in Earlsboro. And then I don't know whatever happened to his dad and his brother and sister, but then Papa stayed, I guess, in Oklahoma, and they might have went back to Arkansas, I don't know. But Papa stayed in Oklahoma, and then he met Mom.
In Oklahoma?
And then they were married somewhere around Earlsboro, I presume.
Do you know when they were married?
No.
Yeah.
No, I don't know.
Do you know if your father had any brothers and sisters?
Yeah. He had this one brother named William, and his sister was named Mary. And the census shows at this time that I looked this record up, he was 21 years old. And his brother was then like 3 years younger than him, and then the sister was like 3 years younger than this brother.
He was the oldest of the children.
And he was 21. And then evidently they came here from Arkansas with Papa's cousin, or we always call him an uncle. And evidently he had lost his wife back in Arkansas, and my dad's father had lost his wife, and they brought these kids to Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. And that's the most that I can remember about them, reading, find out about them. And then after, I don't know, Papa was like 13 years older than Mom, so evidently he had already got settled when he married her. Mm-hmm. And whatever happened to his brother and sister, we never knew. Mm-hmm. I've looked up a lot of different Holderfields, but there'll be, some of them now, like Papa's uncle back in Arkansas, what we called he called Uncle Sam. Now, I have records of him, and I have records of Papa, Mother, and Dad way back there, Mm-hmm. But back in those days, like we've talked about, they didn't tell us about their grandkids or their father and their mother. We never knew. And the only thing I remember Mom telling me was that her dad, when they came from Missouri, they stopped in Henrietta, Oklahoma, and that's where her dad was buried. And as far as her mother, then Esther and them know more about her because she died before Vernon and I was born. Mm-hmm. But Mom told me one time that her dad was buried in Henrietta, Oklahoma. But now I'm the only one that remembers that. And I keep saying I'm going to go to Henrietta. Of course, they may have records of it.
Mm-hmm.
But like we said, back there they didn't like. Just like I said now, though, we don't sit down and tell our kids a lot of things. Just like I've said about Barbara. Just because I think I know it, I think Barbara knows all my past. And so we don't just sit down and explain things to kids like.
That's what we're trying to do here.
And that's the way they didn't do back in those days,
I forgot what I was going to ask you, but did Grandma Holdfield have any brothers and sisters?
Yes. She had, let's see, Mom had Aunt Rosie and Aunt Amy and Aunt Allie. And did I name Aunt Rosie?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Those three sisters are all I can remember because the brothers, I guess, had died before we got old enough to know. Now, Mama's Aunt Amy lived up in El Dorado, Kansas. And then Aunt Rosie lived over at Shawnee. And Aunt Allie lived out in western Oklahoma. She's married to a Sears. And I would keep telling Carolyn, I said, Carolyn, you might run across some Sears when you're out selling insurance over in western Oklahoma. But that was a long ways off, back in those days when to go visit.
They didn't see each other very often.
Well, not that much. Now, we'd go up, say, once a year up to El Dorado to see Aunt Amy, because that seemed to be closer to Mom, that family did. We'd go up there.
Well, how many children were there in your family?
Well, yeah. Well, there were 7. There was Esty was the oldest, then Archie, and then Faye. Then Mom had a baby. Between me and Faye, there was 5 years difference between me and Faye. And this little baby got, back then they called it spinal meningitis, and died. Then that made 5 years difference between me and Faye. And then there was me and Vernie after me, and then Leon and Tommy. So there was 7 of us.
Were there any particular funny things that happened? I'm sure there's a lot of funny things that happened. Anything that stands out in your mind that you or one of your sisters or brothers might have gotten in trouble doing, or something that...
Well, let's see. Well, when you're growing up, you think, back then, I was like, first thing I kind of really remember, an incident in our family was, I remember was when I was like 5, and about 4 or 5. And of course this was during the war, and Papa, we owned this farm, on the north part of this section, and then he leased some land up from some Indians. Well, they'd go up there and work all day on this, like cutting oats or farming. And they came back this one time, and Archie always told me I was like his shadow. And he wanted me, let me hold one of the mules while he was watering all these other horses out in this watering trough. They had a pump out there. They'd have to pump the water up and down, to get the water. So he let me hold on to this mule while he was watering some of the other horses. And of course I was like 4 or 5, and I thought Archie was great big then. I thought he's grown up, but see, I look back now and think he was only like 14, because he was just 9 years older than me. And he let me hold this mule, and when he did, I would hold on to this mule, and it just kept going around. It was wanting to get over and get a drink of water. And the mule would keep going around and around. I had this long rope, and finally I got around behind the mule, and when it did, it kicked me. And, I had that big scar, where you remember. And I can remember, that's the first thing I remember as being a kid, laying on this big old trunk that Mom had, and the doctor coming, and Papa had to give me this anesthetic then, what they call chloroform or ether. Now, whichever it was, I don't know. But he'd have to hold this mask over my face while this doctor was sewing up this. And Papa, of course, I was screaming like a kid would, and the doctor keeps saying, Louis, hold that over her mouth. Well, anyway, he called me afterwards. This was during the war, and I had this big old bandage around my head, and he'd call me his Red Cross nurse. But the funniest thing I remember then, as I got a little older, was that, Vernie was always the welcoming committee. If anybody knocked on our front door, she was always the front to welcome him in, you know. So back then, Mom always had this big old Christmas tree. Now, I don't know where they got their decorations back then, but we had this great big old huge Christmas tree, and we'd have all of our gifts around it. And then that was a big highlight. We'd all gang around. Archie and his family would come home, and Esty and her kids, and Faye, we all lived around. They'd bring the kids all, and we'd all come home. They was married. And back then, we'd peel our oranges. We had this big old pot-bellied stove, and we'd peel our oranges and throw our peelings in this big old pot-bellied stove. So, well, I didn't know, but we were waiting for somebody to get there before we opened our gifts. And what we didn't know was really waiting for Santa Claus to come. And where they ever got the Santa Claus suit or not, I don't know. But, and where the decorations, I've often wondered where they got all these decorations, but we had this big old Christmas tree, and all of our gifts was under here. And we was waiting for somebody to come before we opened our gifts. And about that time, somebody knocked on the front door. And boy, you know, Verna, here she goes to the front door to welcome whoever it was. And here Santa Claus walked in, and he was just a beautiful Santa Claus suit like they have now. And Santa Claus comes in, he gives us all our gifts, and he leaves. We tell him bye, you know, and come find out it was Newt. He was all prettiest Santa Claus, you know. But that broke Vernie from running to the door. It scared that kid to death. She went to the door, and Santa Claus walked in, Lola. That broke her from going in and answering the door.
As it sounds, it seems like Grandpa and Grandma Holderfield had almost two families of kids. They had the older bunch, and then they had the younger bunch. And maybe that's unfair to put it like that, but the older bunch kind of grew up together, and then maybe the four younger ones did.
Yeah, that's true, Rodney. There was like Esty. Now, I always considered her 10 years older than me, and Archie would be like about 9, and then Faye was 5, and then I was. Well, those older kids always talked about having a rough time growing up. You know, they had to work and everything, you know. And then there was me and Vernie and Leon and Tommy. But, you know, growing up, I thought probably we were poor. You know, I look back and I thought, you know, maybe we were real poor then, because people in town, we weren't. As I've grown up, I look back, you know, and we had a lot more than people had in town. I had this friend, after we grew up, Opal and I'd get talking about, she lived in town. Her dad was a rig builder, and I thought, oh, they had money, you know, because they lived in town. And here we was out here on the farm, and Opal's talked about how well off we were, see. And we thought we were poor because we lived out in the country. And I've thought back since then how Mom's house, how our home was. We had this real pretty, we called it the parlor. And we first had an organ, you know, an old pump organ. You probably you've seen those old-fashioned organs. And then Papa gave Esty the organ. She took down Miss Feline's and bought a piano for us kids. Well, in the front room, Mom had this real pretty divan and chair and this piano, and then between the parlor and the dining area was these French doors. Well, we never did go in there other than just practice our piano lesson. You know, me and Vernie's taking piano lessons. Or if we had company, we'd go in there. But growing up, then we thought we were poor. But I look back now and think, you know, we were pretty well off. I mean,
wasn't Grandpa Holderfield a very charitable person?
Oh, he was, and he was what I call him. I look back now, he was really. We call him a trader. He could provide. Seemed like us kids anything we wanted. Now us last bunch of 4 kids, I'll say, seemed like we had anything we wanted. And Esty tells how her and Faye and Archie had to get out and pick cotton. And the only thing I remember about cotton when farming was Papa would pull this wagon down in the big old cotton field, and he always went in town with this truck and brought a bunch of niggers, we called them then, out to pick cotton. And that was mine and Vernie's job, to go down to this. They'd pull this wagon out in the big old cotton field, and they'd put this tongue up on the wagon and put cotton scales out there. And that's mine and Vernie's job. We'd take this tablet down there, And we had put all these niggers' names down, and as they'd come, they'd go down the rows and pick their cotton, and when they'd come back, that was mine and Bernie's job to put these cotton weights down. Whatever this nigger's name was, if he come weigh his cotton, we'd put so many pounds down, and at the end of the day, we'd know how much cotton he picked. And this one time, me and Vernie, of course, she's always, after they'd get up and empty their cotton up there, she'd jump up and play in the cotton, you know. She's like 3 years younger than me. I don't know how old we were, but we was old enough to know how to write the cotton weights down. So this old black nigger guy came up, and he weighed his cotton, and he got up in the back of the wagon, and he emptied his sack of cotton, and Papa always planted watermelons in his cotton field. And so he weighs his cotton, and I put how much his weight, cotton sack and everything weighed. And he got up there and emptied it. And so after he left, Bernie gets up there to play, and when she does, here's this watermelon he'd put in his cotton sack and weighed his cotton, you know, so he'd have a lot of weight at the end of the day because they paid him so much for the pound. But anything, it seemed like Papa always provided. I mean, like I said, at the time we thought we were having a rough time, but I look back now, Rodney and we were pretty well off. Because he raised cattle, he'd sell cattle, or he'd raise pigs, he'd sell pigs, and then he'd raise cotton, he'd sell cotton. He just knew how to manage, I guess. And then, of course, the oil fields came, and then that's what made it easier on us younger kids, I guess.
Was Grandpa Holderfield a big man like Archie and Leon?
He was built about like Leon. You know, Leon didn't really seem as tall as Archie when you really thought about the two guys, and that was the way Papa was because he's more stocky built. He was, he was about the size of Leon, the way I remember Papa being. And of course, Mom was taller. She's about half a head taller than Papa, really. She was a tall, big woman. Of course, you remember her, but you don't remember.
Was your everybody knows that Grandma Holderfield was more or less the nucleus of the family.
Yeah.
Was your father more or less the rebel rouser, or was he, a pretty square guy?
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I don't remember. Now, Est and them tells more. See, there was that was the area of when Papa was younger, and probably.
I've just heard tell he liked to joke around quite a bit.
Oh, he was a big cut up, like Leon. You know, Leon did a lot like that too. But yeah, Papa was a big cut up, and was jolly and seemed like he was always the one that we went to if we wanted any money or anything, you know. And Mom used to tell me, but Papa never did worry about anything, but I'm sure he did. You never would know it. He's jolly and always laugh, fun, and cutting up. Mom said she had to do all the worrying, but you never knew either one of them did. But
okay. Let's take a little break.
Okay.